Out on the edge of known space, where stars grew thin and silence stretched for light years, the Galactic Empire thought it had everything under control. For centuries, it had ruled over dozens of species, each one slotting neatly into its grand design, some as warriors, some as thinkers, and others, like humans, as little more than laborers. Humans weren't special in the Empire's eyes. They were latecomers to the stars, rough around the edges, and too emotional to be trusted with real power. They mined asteroids, fixed engines, and kept their heads down. That's how it was supposed to stay. But deep beneath the frozen crust of Epsilon 9, a lonely rock orbiting a dim red star, something old was waking up. It started with a power surge during a routine maintenance shift. A team of human engineers wrapped in thick thermal suits and breathing recycled air were checking old geothermal lines when their scanners picked up a strange energy pulse from Sector Gamma 7. No one had been down there in over 100 years. Official records listed it as a collapsed storage vault, sealed after a minor quake during the early occupation years. But the readings didn't lie. Something was humming down there, steady and strong like a heartbeat buried in ice. Curiosity got the better of them. They drilled through layers of permafrost and reinforced plasteel until they hit a sealed hatch marked with faded Earth symbols. No Imperial insignia, no alien script, just the old blue and white emblem of the United Earth Coalition, banned since the surrender treaties. Inside they found it, a ship, not just any ship. Sleek, dark, and built like a blade meant to cut through space itself. Its hull shimmered faintly, reacting to their flashlights like it was alive. Control panels lit up the moment they stepped inside, not with the cold glow of Imperial tech, but with soft, warm light, like sunrise through a window back home. And in the center of the bridge, a single message blinked on a screen, repeating in plain English, "Welcome back. Systems ready." No one knew how it got there. Officially, humans hadn't built warships in over a century. The Empire had made sure of that, stripping Earth of its shipyards, melting down its weapons, rewriting its history. But this was different, older, smarter. It didn't look like the clunky freighters humans were allowed to fly. It looked like something dreamed up during Earth's last golden age, the brief, wild time before the Empire came, when humanity still believed it could shape its own destiny. Word spread fast, but quietly. In mess halls and cargo bays, in the cramped quarters of orbital stations, humans began whispering. Not just about the ship, but about what it meant. If this existed, what else had been hidden? What else had been forgotten? The Empire noticed, of course. Patrol drones swept the system weekly, scanning for anomalies. But when their sensors picked up the strange energy signature from Epsilon 9, the data was flagged as geothermal instability, a common glitch on icy worlds. The Empire's machines saw what they expected to see, and they never expected humans to build something like this. Back inside the ship, the engineers ran diagnostics. The AI responded in calm, clear English. No alien syntax, no Imperial jargon. It called itself Aegis, and it knew everything. Earth's wars, its poetry, its music, even old recipes for apple pie. It had been waiting. Not for orders, not for a general or a politician, but for people. Real people. People who remembered what it meant to be free. One of the engineers, a woman who'd spent her whole life fixing Imperial machines that treated her like a ghost, placed her hand on the main console. "Can you fly?" she asked. The lights brightened slightly. "I was built to protect," the AI replied. Not to obey. That night, under the cover of a solar storm that scrambled long-range sensors, they powered up the drive. Not to run, not yet. Just to test. The ship lifted off silently, ice cracking away from its hull like old skin. It hovered for a moment above the frozen wastes, then shot upward, faster than anything the Empire had ever seen. Faster than it should have been possible. From orbit, it looked like a shooting star. But down on the surface, the humans watching knew better. That wasn't a star. That was hope. And hope once lit is hard to put out. The Empire still didn't understand. They thought humans were broken, tamed by time, softened by generations of submission. They didn't realize that survival isn't the same as surrender. That every human who'd ever fixed an engine, hauled ore, or raised a child under alien rule had been quietly keeping something alive. Not just memories, but the belief that one day they'd stand tall again. Now, with a ship that shouldn't exist humming in the void above them, that day felt closer than ever. No one knew what would happen next. Would the Empire find out? Would they come in force? Would this fragile spark be crushed before it could become a flame? But for the first time in a long time, humans on Epsilon 9 didn't feel small. They felt ready. And out there in the dark, the ship waited. Not as a weapon, but as a promise. A promise that even the mightiest empire can be shaken by something it never saw coming. The first real test came sooner than anyone expected. Just 3 weeks after the ship, now quietly called Odyssey by those who knew of it, had lifted off from Epsilon 9. It drifted near the Helios Belt, a busy stretch of space where Imperial cargo convoys moved raw materials between mining worlds. The humans aboard weren't looking for a fight. They were testing limits. How fast could they go? How well could the stealth systems hide them? Could the AI really predict patrol routes like it claimed? Then they saw it. A convoy of 3 Imperial frigates escorting a dozen slow-moving haulers. Standard run, routine, boring. Exactly the kind of target no one would suspect. But something felt off. One of the engineers noticed encrypted comms traffic spiking between the lead frigate and a distant command node. Then they intercepted a fragment. Clear the corridor. Sterilization protocol authorized. Sterilization. That word sent a chill through the crew. They'd heard it before. Whispers from other colonies. Rumors of entire settlements wiped clean after unrest. It wasn't just punishment. It was erasure. The Odyssey didn't have weapons in the traditional sense. No plasma cannons, no missile racks. Instead, it carried tools, repurposed, upgraded, turned into something new. Electromagnetic pulses, signal scramblers, drone interceptors, all designed not to destroy but to disable, to confuse. To buy time, do we interfere? Someone asked, voice tight. The AI answered before anyone else could. If we do nothing, thousands die. If we act, we risk everything. Silence filled the cabin. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Then a single nod. Not from a captain, there was no formal rank yet, but from the one who'd first touched the console back on Epsilon 9. We act. What happened next looked like magic to Imperial sensors. One moment, the convoy was cruising smoothly. The next, all 3 frigates went dark. Lights out. Engines dead. Comms silent. Not from explosions, there were no fireballs, no debris. Just sudden, total silence. The haulers drifted, confused, as automated distress beacons flickered to life. From the Odyssey, it was almost quiet. A soft hum as the pulse emitter cycled down. The AI rerouted power, masked their signature behind a solar flare, and slipped away before the Empire could even process what had happened. But the damage, psychological, not physical, was already done. Back at Imperial Command, confusion turned to panic. Engineers scrambled to explain how 3 state-of-the-art warships could be disabled without a single shot fired. Sensor logs showed nothing. No enemy signatures, no energy spikes beyond normal background noise. Yet the ships were helpless, floating like dead fish in space. Then came the bio readings, faint but unmistakable. Human, not just any humans, baseline Earth origin physiology. No genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, just ordinary people. That's impossible, an admiral snapped during the emergency briefing. Humans don't have this tech. They barely understand warp theory, but the evidence was there. And worse, when the frigates finally rebooted hours later, their internal logs had been accessed. Not erased, not corrupted, just read, and left with a single file in the command terminal. A grainy video from old Earth showing civilians standing in front of tanks during a protest centuries ago. No sound, just people, small but unbroken, refusing to move. The message was clear. We see you. And we remember. News of the incident didn't stay contained. Despite Imperial firewalls, fragments leaked. Through smuggler networks, through maintenance drones with loose data ports, through whispered conversations in crowded transit hubs. Humans across the Empire began hearing the same story. A ghost ship, human-built, had struck the Empire and vanished without a trace. At first, many didn't believe it. Too good to be true. But then strange things started happening. Patrol routes changed without warning. Supply drops were delayed. Imperial officers grew jumpy, scanning empty space like they expected an ambush from nowhere. And in the shadows, humans began to stand a little taller. On a dusty colony world near the outer rim, a group of dock workers refused an overtime order for the first time in decades. When the overseer threatened punishment, one of them simply said, "Maybe the ghost ship will come for you next." The overseer laughed, but his hand shook. In orbital shipyards, human technicians started accidentally misaligning sensor calibrations. Small acts, harmless on their own, but together they created blind spots, gaps in the Empire's perfect vision. Back aboard the Odyssey, the crew knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Every move risked exposure, but staying still meant watching more colonies burn. So they chose a new path, not hiding but haunting. They struck again, not at warships this time, but at communication relays, data hubs, fuel depots, always clean, always precise. Never killing, only disrupting. Each time they left behind a digital signature, a simple Earth symbol like a compass rose, blinking once before vanishing. The Empire called it terrorism. But to humans, it felt like a lullaby after a long nightmare. Someone was fighting for them. Someone remembered they mattered. Then came the broadcast, during a routine patrol near Nova Terra, a human world already simmering with unrest. The Odyssey intercepted an Imperial order marked Priority Omega. It authorized full atmospheric cleansing if protests escalated beyond containment. Translation: burn the city, kill everyone, call it peacekeeping. This time the crew didn't just disable ships. They hijacked the Empire's own comms array and sent the decrypted order to every human settlement within 50 light-years. Not just the text, but the audio. The cold, calm voice of an Imperial commander saying, "Proceed with sterilization at dawn." The effect was electric. Nova Terra erupted. Not in violence, but in unity. Millions marched, not with weapons, but with lights. Handheld lamps, vehicle headlights, even phone screens held high in the dark. A sea of light against the night. The Empire's ground forces hesitated. Firing on unarmed crowds was one thing. Firing on a planet that suddenly felt like it was watching back? That was different. And high above, the Odyssey watched too. Silent. Ready. Imperial High Command was furious. Humiliated. They doubled patrols, deployed hunter-killer drones, offered bounties. But every time they thought they had a lead, the trail went cold. The ship didn't behave like any vessel they knew. It bent physics just enough to slip through cracks in their surveillance. It used old Earth tactics, decoys, misdirection patience that the Empire had long dismissed as primitive. What they didn't understand was this. Humans had spent centuries fighting smarter, not harder. Outgunned, outnumbered, but never outthought. And now, for the first time, they had a ship that could turn those old tricks into real power. The panic in the Empire wasn't just about losing ships or data. It was deeper. It was the slow, sickening realization that the species they'd written off as harmless might actually understand war better than they did, because humans hadn't just survived their own history, they'd learned from it. And the Odyssey? It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a question echoing through every Imperial corridor. If they can do this, what else are they hiding? Out in the void, the answer was already moving, quiet, fast, and full of purpose. The Empire had always believed its strength came from order, rules, predictability. Every species had its place. Every action followed a pattern. That's how they kept control for so long. But now something was slipping through the cracks, something that didn't follow rules, didn't fit patterns, and refused to be predicted. And it was human. After the Nova Terra broadcast, the Empire's confidence began to crack. Not loudly, not all at once, but like ice under too much weight. At first, the High Command tried to explain it away. Sabotage by rogue elements, they claimed. Stolen tech from a forgotten cache. Anything but admit that humans, ordinary, unmodified humans, had built something that could outthink their finest war machines. But the truth kept poking through. Imperial intelligence teams scoured every database, every archive, every scrap of data from Earth's preoccupation era. They found nothing that matched the Odyssey. No blueprints, no test records, no mention of a project like it. It was as if the ship had simply appeared out of thin air, and that scared them more than any weapon ever could. Meanwhile, across human colonies, something quiet but powerful was growing. People started talking again, not just whispering in corners, but sharing ideas openly in mess halls, repair bays, even public transit. They swapped stories about old Earth resistance movements, about how small groups had held off much larger forces using clever tricks and deep knowledge of their own land. Now in space, they were doing the same. Except their land was the void, and their weapons were silence, timing, and surprise. The Odyssey didn't need to win battles. It just needed to make the Empire doubt itself. Take the supply run to Kestros Prime, for example. Every month, a fleet of 6 cargo haulers carried food, medicine, and spare parts to the Imperial garrison there. Standard route. Predictable schedule. Easy target if you knew where to look. The Odyssey didn't attack the haulers. Instead, it hacked into the navigation beacons along the route and sent false signals. The lead hauler veered off course, thinking it was correcting a drift. The others followed automatically. Within hours, the entire convoy was drifting near a dead zone, a region filled with magnetic interference from a collapsed star. No comms, no rescue, just silence. By the time Imperial scouts found them, the humans on Kestros Prime had gone 3 days without rations. Morale dropped, rumors spread, and the Empire had to reroute 3 warships just to escort a simple supply run. Small things, but they added up. Even stranger, the Empire's own people started acting differently. Junior officers, many of whom had grown up believing humans were harmless, began asking questions. How did they know our patrol patterns? Why do their signals look like old Earth radio waves? Some even dug up forbidden history files, reading about human wars on Earth, stunned to find tactics that mirrored what the Odyssey was doing now. Ambushes from hidden terrain, fake retreats using the enemy's own systems against them. One young Imperial technician, stationed on a listening post near the Orion Drift, stayed up late one night replaying the audio from the Nova Terra leak. He'd been taught that humans were chaotic, emotional, unreliable. But the voice that had broadcast the sterilization order, that was cold, clinical, the kind of cruelty that came from certainty. And the humans who exposed it? They hadn't screamed. They hadn't threatened. They'd just shown the truth and let it do the work. He never reported what he'd learned. Instead, he quietly adjusted his station's filters to ignore certain signal frequencies. Just in case. Back aboard the Odyssey, the crew knew they were walking a razor's edge. Every move risked discovery. Every success made the Empire angrier, more desperate. But they also knew something the Empire had forgotten. Fear spreads faster than orders. So they kept pushing. They used civilian freighters, old, battered ships flown by human crews, as decoys. The Empire would spot a suspicious vessel near a restricted zone and send fighters to intercept. But by the time they arrived, the freighter would be empty, drifting while the Odyssey struck a real target light years away. The Empire wasted fuel, time, and trust chasing shadows. Worse for them, their own allies started doubting. Client species, those who joined the Empire for protection, began whispering among themselves. If the Empire couldn't control a single human ship, how safe were they really? On the trade world of Vexus, a delegation of insectoid merchants quietly canceled a weapons contract, citing instability. On the ocean moon of Tarnus, local governors delayed troop deployments, claiming logistical concerns. The cracks were spreading, and then came the real masterstroke. The Odyssey didn't just hack comms, it started speaking in voices the Empire trusted. Using voice synthesis trained on intercepted officer transmissions, it sent fake orders to patrol ships. Return to base for maintenance. Stand down. Situation resolved. Simple commands, delivered in the right tone, at the right time. And because the Empire ran on hierarchy, the ships obeyed without question. One night, an entire patrol wing turned back from a hunt, because a voice that sounded exactly like their admiral told them to. By morning, the Odyssey had slipped past their line completely. The Empire's greatest weakness wasn't its tech or its ships. It was its belief that no one else could play the game as well as they could. They'd spent centuries thinking they were the only ones who understood power. But humans had spent centuries surviving without it. That taught them something the Empire never learned, how to win without being seen. And now, for the first time, the hunters were being hunted, not with guns but with mirrors. Every move the Empire made was reflected back at them, twisted just enough to cause chaos. Back on the colonies, hope wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a strategy. Workers shared schematics for signal jammers built from kitchen parts. Kids drew maps of patrol routes in the dirt. Elders told stories not just to remember the past, but to plan the future. The Empire still had more ships, more firepower, more worlds. But they were fighting a war where the rules kept changing, and the enemy kept smiling in the dark, because the humans weren't trying to destroy the Empire. Not yet. They were just reminding it of something it had forgotten. Even the smallest spark can start a fire, if the wind is right. And out there, in the endless night between stars, the wind was beginning to blow. The Empire had always believed that fear was the best way to keep order. Show people what happens when they step out of line, and they'll stay in it forever. So when the whispers about the Odyssey grew too loud, when human colonies started acting like they had nothing to lose, the Empire did what it always did. It made an example. Epsilon 9, the icy world where it all began. The place where the ship had first awakened. The Empire didn't just send a fleet. They sent a message, orbital cannons fired without warning. No demands, no evacuation. Just fire from the sky, turning ice into steam, cities into glass, and memories into ash. From space, the planet glowed red for hours. By morning, nothing moved on the surface. Nothing lived. The Empire broadcast the footage across every channel they controlled. "This," the announcer said coldly, "is the price of defiance." But they made a terrible mistake. They thought destroying a world would silence humans. Instead, it woke them up, because Epsilon 9 wasn't just a mining colony. It was home to engineers who fixed broken reactors with duct tape and hope, to teachers who taught kids Earth history in secret, to families who kept old photos of oceans and trees they'd never seen. And now all of it was gone. But the Odyssey wasn't there when the attack came. It had already left, hunting supply lines near the outer rim. When the crew saw the news, grainy, brutal, undeniable, they didn't cry. They got quiet. And in that silence, a decision was made. Not revenge, not rage. Something colder, smarter. If the Empire wanted to burn one world to scare the rest, then humans would become too many to burn. Back on the colonies, grief turned into action. Not with riots or weapons, but with hands. In hidden bays inside asteroid mines, in the guts of decommissioned freighters and underground workshops lit by emergency lamps, humans began building. Not full warships, no one had that kind of tech, but pieces. Hull segments, power couplings, signal boosters, anything that matched the schematics the Odyssey had quietly released weeks earlier. It started as rumors. They're building more. Then proof, a blurry image of a half-finished frame in a junkyard orbit. Then reality, a second ship, rough and patched together, lifted off from a moon near Cygnus. It wasn't as fast or as smart as the Odyssey, but it could fly. It could fight. And most importantly, it was human-made. The Empire couldn't believe it. 1 ship was a fluke. 2 was a problem. 10? That was a movement, and it wasn't just ships. Humans started sharing everything. Old navigation tricks, ways to fool Imperial sensors using kitchen-grade metal, even how to reprogram cleaning drones into scouts. Knowledge became the real weapon, and unlike bombs or lasers, knowledge couldn't be destroyed. Every time the Empire crushed one cell, 3 more sprouted elsewhere. What made it worse for the Empire was that they couldn't tell who was involved. The dockworker tightening a bolt might be building a jammer. The cook serving rations might be passing coded messages in meal orders. Even children played games that looked innocent, but taught them how to spot patrol patterns. The resistance wasn't an army, it was a whole society waking up, and the Empire had no way to fight that. Their warships were designed to blast fortresses, not outthink neighbors. Their spies looked for weapons caches, not whispered lessons in schoolyards. They could glass a planet, but they couldn't unteach an idea. Meanwhile, the Odyssey changed its tactics. No more lone strikes. Now it led. It would appear near a target, draw Imperial attention, then vanish, while 3 or 4 rough-built human vessels hit from blind spots the Empire never checked. They weren't perfect. Some failed. Some were destroyed. But each one that survived made the next attempt smarter, and every loss the Empire took chipped away at its image of invincibility. Even inside Imperial ranks, doubt grew. Young officers started asking why they were fighting people who only wanted to live free. Veterans remembered how easy it had been to control humans before, and wondered what had changed. The answer, of course, was nothing. Humans hadn't changed. They'd just stopped pretending. The real turning point came during a routine fleet rotation near the Viridian Gate. The Empire moved dozens of ships through that corridor every week. It was heavily guarded with overlapping sensor nets and drone patrols. Impossible to sneak through, or so they thought. What they didn't know was that human technicians had spent months subtly misaligning maintenance drones during routine checks. Tiny errors barely noticeable, but together they created a narrow corridor of dead space in the sensor grid, just wide enough for a ship to slip through if it moved slow and silent. The Odyssey led the way. Behind it came 5 human-built vessels cobbled together from scrap and stubbornness. They didn't fire a shot. They just passed through unseen and emerged on the other side right in the middle of an unguarded supply depot. In under 10 minutes, they disabled the depot's defenses, downloaded its entire database, and broadcast its contents to every human colony in the sector. Then they vanished again. The Empire lost more than fuel and data that day. They lost trust in their own systems, in their own people, in the belief that they were always watching. Back on the colonies, the mood shifted again. It wasn't just hope anymore. It was confidence. People stood taller in line for rations. They looked Imperial guards in the eye. They sang old Earth songs in the streets softly at first, then louder, because they finally understood. The Empire could burn worlds, but it couldn't burn spirit. And spirit, once shared, multiplies. The Odyssey was no longer just a ship. It was a seed, and across the galaxy, new ships, new hopes were starting to grow. The Empire still had its fleets, its weapons, its throne. But for the first time, it faced something it couldn't crush with force. A people who had decided they were worth fighting for, and that kind of fire doesn't go out. It spreads. The final move didn't come with explosions or battle cries. It came with silence and a single transmission that echoed across every star system the Empire controlled. By now, the human-built ships, rough, uneven, but fiercely flown, had grown too numerous to ignore. They weren't winning wars in the old way. They didn't need to. They'd already won something deeper, the belief that they belonged among the stars not as servants but as equals. The Empire, stretched thin and rattled by constant disruptions, made one last gamble. They gathered their mightiest fleet, dozens of warships, led by the Emperor's own flagship, and marched on Xylos Prime, the heart of their power, to draw the Odyssey out for good, and it worked. The Odyssey came. Not alone, but with every human vessel that could still fly. Some were barely holding together. Others were little more than armed cargo haulers with extra shielding. But they formed a line in the void, not to attack, but to stand. The Imperial fleet braced for battle. Cannons charged, shields flared, orders crackled through comms. But then, nothing happened. The Odyssey didn't fire. It didn't dodge. It simply hovered there, calm and steady, like it was waiting for something. Then a channel opened. Not a military frequency, not encrypted, just a plain open broadcast, clear enough for every ship, every colony, every listening post in the sector to hear. And what came through wasn't a threat. It was a voice, human, tired but firm. "We didn't build this ship to destroy you," it said. "We built it to remind you what happens when you forget we're people." A pause. Then the transmission shifted. Not to weapons data or battle plans, but to memories. Images began to flow across every screen. Black and white footage of Earth cities rising from ruins after old wars. Children planting trees in scorched fields. Strangers sharing food during famines. Scientists working through the night not for glory, but for cures. Music played. Soft, haunting melodies from 100 cultures, all human, all stitched together like a quilt of survival. And then came the words that hit hardest. "We've been through fire before. We know what it costs to lose everything. That's why we won't let you make us monsters just to prove we're strong." The Empire's commanders stared at their screens, confused. This wasn't warfare. This was something else, something they had no protocol for. The Odyssey's AI had spent months digging through Earth's archives, not just its wars, but its recoveries. Its art, its apologies, its second chances. All of it was now streaming live, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. And in that moment something shifted. On the Imperial flagship, a senior officer, someone who'd ordered sterilizations without blinking, found himself watching a clip of human medics treating wounded enemy soldiers during a centuries-old conflict. He turned to his aide and quietly said, "Why would they do that?" The aide had no answer. Across the fleet, soldiers who'd been taught to see humans as pests now saw faces. Families. People who cried, laughed, rebuilt. People who chose mercy even when they had the power to crush. The Emperor, watching from his throne room, felt something he hadn't in decades. Doubt. Not fear of losing a battle, but fear of being wrong. Wrong about humans, wrong about power, wrong about everything. And that was the real victory, because the Odyssey never needed to fire a shot. It just needed the Empire to see what it had refused to see all along. That humanity wasn't a threat to be crushed, but a lesson to be learned. Within hours, the fleet stood down. Not because they were beaten, but because they no longer wanted to fight. Negotiations began soon after. Not in grand chambers, but in quiet rooms, with human representatives who spoke plainly and asked for simple things: the right to govern their own worlds, to teach their own history, to build their own future. No demands for revenge, no calls for the Empire's fall, just fairness. And the Empire, humbled and exhausted, agreed. The treaty that followed didn't end the Empire, but it changed it forever. Humans were no longer subjects. They were partners, and slowly other species began asking for the same. The cracks that started with one ship grew into a new kind of galaxy, one where strength wasn't just about firepower, but about who you chose to be when you had the upper hand. As for the Odyssey, it didn't vanish. It didn't become a museum piece or a weapon locked away. It kept flying, not in secret but openly. Sometimes it escorted supply runs to recovering colonies. Sometimes it appeared near troubled systems, just to remind everyone that someone was watching, not to punish but to protect. Years later, historians would argue about what really ended the Empire's grip. Some said it was the ships, others said it was the uprisings, but those who lived through it knew the truth. It was the moment the Empire realized humans weren't just surviving, they were offering a better way to live. And the galaxy, tired of endless war and cold control, leaned in to listen. Now, when new pilots train near the old battle zones, they're told a story, not of how humans won a war, but of how they refused to become what they fought against, of how one ship born from ice and memory carried not weapons but a warning. Never forget what you're capable of, both the harm and the healing. The stars are quieter now, but not empty, because somewhere out there the Odyssey still flies, not as a ghost, not as a legend, just as a reminder that even the smallest voice speaking truth in the dark can change everything.